Welcome to a special edition of Niners Nation. We are going to break down what we have seen at training camp. My name is Kyle Posey. I have been here since this past Saturday. I'm joined by a first-time member of Niners Nation, Jordan Elliott. Jordan, what's going on, man?
Doing pretty good, man. It's been an eventful week in Santa Clara down here at training camp.
Yeah, it's been fun for sure. It feels like it's been forever since we got a chance to see football. So it's fun to see, the rookies, the vets, and everybody just kind of come together. So let's start with a question that we had just from Twitter. So somebody asked, how has Lance stood up against the first string defense? And that's going to be a question that everybody wants to know because the hype train for Trey Lance has been out of control, just bonkers. And rightfully so, because he looks great. Like, he looks really, really, really good. But he hasn't gone against the first-team defense. He hasn't thrown a pass against Jason Verrett, Fred Warner, Jimmy Ward. He hasn't seen the speed of the first-team defense. And I feel like, we kind of have to ask ourselves, are we putting enough weight on that? Are we crowning Trey Lance too soon just because he's dominating the second team? Or would we see that if he's with the first team? What do you think about that?
I think that definitely the expectation should be tempered a little bit because obviously there's a reason why the first team is the first team and the second team isn't the first team. But I do think that he's doing a lot of things that will transfer to whenever he is taking reps against the first team. The main things that stand out, obviously, is the arm strength and the ability to extend plays with his legs. As great as the players are on the first team, we saw how many issues they had with more mobile quarterbacks over the last couple of years. Trey Lance is another guy that's going to give them problems in that regard. And then the other thing for me is the way he's working through his progressions. The windows will probably be a little bit tighter on that first team defense when he's going up against them. But the way he's able to see the field and get to his second and third option and then have the willingness to take chances downfield, I think that will ultimately translate as well. So, it's unfair to expect him to just come in and play the exact same way he's been playing. But again, the skills and some of the positives that I'm taking away from his reps against the second team will carry over to his reps against the first team, in my opinion.
Brad, the SF Niners, says that he believes that what Trey Lance does will translate to the first team. I think that's fair just because think about what he's doing. Think about, his speed in general. Think about his arm strength. So when we see Jimmy make the far hash throws against the first team defense, the DBs have a chance to break on those passes. When we see Trey Lance do the same thing, it's on a line, it's a rocket, and the DBs aren't close to that. So let me ask you this. What do you think about, because more and more as as practice has gone on, we've seen more Brandon Ayuk and George Kittle on the second team than we have on the first team. Should we be reading into that at all? Because I have some thoughts on that.
Yeah, I think definitely this is my thinking of it is that if Kyle is giving reps with first team skill position players behind a second team offensive line, technically the reps will be, you can kind of hide behind the excuse of, we just want everybody to get comfortable with each other and we want the backups to get comfortable with the first team players and all this easy coach speak you can throw out there. I think that it's been very carefully planned that way, and I don't think it's a mistake at all that we're seeing more and more reps go to Brandon Ayuk and George Kittle. I saw Sermon get a few reps with the second team with Lance under center as well. And again, I think it just falls back on if you put Lance behind the first team offensive line with those skill players, all of a sudden you have this huge fiasco of, okay, well, Jimmy Garoppolo losing his job. Is Trey Lance already past him? Is there a real QB competition? I think it creates a lot of discussion and noise that Kyle Shanahan and that team just frankly don't want right now. But I think that they got to a point where they couldn't ignore how good Trey Lance has been and how skilled he is. And anybody who's been there watching can see it with their own eyes. It's no disrespect to Jimmy Garoppolo. Trey Lance is just an exceptionally gifted football player, and it's incredible how fast he seems to be picking up the install, the huddle cadence, and again, knowing where to go with the football. And it's just gotten to the point where I think that Kyle is trying to get him as comfortable with those first team skill position guys as he can without creating the noise, so that ultimately when he has to make that switch, it's as seamless as he can possibly make.
Yeah, I think what we saw, so Mike McGlinchey said last Saturday that Trey Lance, he's learning the verbiage. He's spitting out the play calls. He's getting comfortable, and he's saying the plays more confident. So when you see that translate to the field, you're seeing him make these plays. And we're talking about just him tearing up the second team defense. So the last 2 days in practice, I have him down as 20 for 22, which, come on, man. Like, what are we doing right now? It feels like we're just wasting time with him on the second team. And what I see is, and when I say 20 of 22, instantly a lot of people would probably think, oh, he's just, dumping it off, throwing, quick out routes and quick curl routes or whatever. But whatever might be the case. And that's not it at all. He is heaving the ball down the field. He is taking shots. He is throwing the ball outside the numbers, 20 yards down the field. So for him to be that accurate, and I remember you telling me about this when I first got there, that, he's been selling the ball. Like, his passes are floating on him. That's not here anymore. Like, that's not a problem. So where did that go? What fixed? Because in my mind, it just seemed like he was falling back a little bit, like he was leaning off his back foot, and that's why the passes were sailing on him. Obviously, he's aware of that because Trey Lance is watching film, and his quarterbacks, the quarterback coach is as well. But every issue that we had last week just kind of went away out of nowhere. And that's before we get into him taking off when there's nobody open, or him buying time with his legs, or just him using, being a designed runner. So I don't know if you got a chance to see this, but during practice, during individual drills, he was working with Deebo Samuel by himself, and they were working on with like a triple option, which would be the first time they ever bust that out. So obviously the 49ers have run like a zone read variation with CJ Beathard a few times here and there, but what they have up their sleeves with this guy, like, it's going to be really, really fun, man.
Yeah, and I think, the biggest thing that stood out to me was when the first couple of days, so it's particularly Thursday and Friday's practice last week, a little less on Saturday. He was sailing balls a little high. He was a little late on some of his timing. But I said at the time also when it happened, like, hey, it's the first week of camp. The guy's a 21-year-old rookie. Like, even seasoned vets are going to be off a little bit the first week of training camp. But the biggest thing that stood out to me was when he missed those throws high or he was a little bit late, you could see with his body language. To me, body language is so important. And the way that he was aware of his mistake, but he wasn't pouting, he wasn't brushing it off like it was nothing. You could tell he kind of was aware that there was a problem. And he kind of, you could tell he was kind of talking to himself a little bit, like, I can't miss that one. I got to come back with this next rep. And the reps after his bad throws were like almost all great. And you could tell that there is a humbleness and a willingness to want to improve, even on these minor little things in training camp. And half those practices were without pads when he was having these issues. And he still is a guy where you could tell that the work ethic is very present there. And again, it's a minor little detail, but when I notice his body language after these throws, I'm like, wow, that's what you really want in a guy that you're kind of banking the future of your franchise on. And then sure enough, within the next couple of days, these little minor things that were issues are starting to clear themselves up. So I think like I said yesterday, I don't know how you felt. I thought yesterday he was far and away the best player on the field out of anybody on the first, second, third team. Anybody I saw on that practice field, he was the best player in my opinion.
Yeah, I think that we were quick to crown him before, like leading up to Wednesday's practice, because like he made some plays, like he was doing some things. The day where everybody saw the bomb, that pro day throw, like that was impressive. But outside of that, I really didn't think that he was, crazy good. But yes, like on Wednesdays when you start to think like, oh God, like maybe he is that guy. So I just feel like we're wasting time with him on the second team. There's really nothing left for him to prove there because he's just tearing them up, man. There's nothing that they can really do. But let's talk about Jimmy, because I don't think he's been bad. And it's more so that Trey's just been good, where you know what you're getting with Jimmy, and what he's done so far in practice hasn't been a surprise. He's always been like a practice type of player where he does make the same type of mistakes. And what you see in practice is what he does in the game as well, whether it's, holding the ball, missing a receiver, whether it's missing the underneath defender, which has been an issue in 3 practices in a row. And Trey Lance has outplayed him 3 practices in a row. But to be fair to Jimmy, like he's found Ross Dwelly, he's found guys like Mohamed Sanu, whoever it may be that he's working with over the middle of the field. So he's not playing poorly. He's just not playing up to the level that I guess would hold off the rookie starter. What have you seen from Jimmy so far?
So I'm going through my notes right here, and I have, it's a lot of it is what we've seen from Jimmy before. He looks sharp throwing those short to intermediate routes. He looks good throwing into the flat. He looks good when he gets a quick read over the middle. But when he's asked to throw deep or outside the numbers, or there's a little bit of pressure, there's a little bit of chaos in the pocket, he looks like the Jimmy we've gotten accustomed to, unfortunately. And that's a guy that tends to be a little bit too sporadic for my liking when there's not just perfectly ideal conditions out there. And just like you said, up until Wednesday's practice, I didn't think that there was enough from Trey Lance. Obviously, the physical gifts were there. He's much better as a runner. He has a stronger arm, but just, based on both performances, I didn't think that he was so much better that I would objectively say he's been better than Jimmy Garoppolo. Wednesday's practice kind of vaulted him past, in my opinion. It was that good. But just like you said, Jimmy has had a solid camp. The issue is that he's just been super inconsistent. So going through my notes, I have a few written down here where it's, he had this great, I don't know if you saw that wheel route he threw to Mostert up the sideline a couple days ago. I believe Al-Shaair was covering him. And he had him blanketed. Like, it was great coverage. It just was a ball put right in a spot where only the receiver could get it in Mostert. And he had a couple good throws to Dwelly. I believe it was Saturday's practice. He had a really nice throw to Dwelly. The biggest issue for me was that, number one, he would have great throws where you're sitting there and you're like, wow, okay, like maybe the ankle's better. Maybe he's feeling more confident. Maybe, this really is a new Jimmy. And then the next play is just absolutely awful. And you're seeing the same thing where he's putting a ball where it shouldn't go. He's shown a lot of hesitation. And that's the other point I would harp on real quick is that I think he has to see the writing on the wall. The Niners gave up all these picks. They mortgaged all this capital to get Trey Lance. He knows that his time is limited there. And if you'd hope in that situation that he would just kind of let it rip and he would start taking chances and getting aggressive. And it seems like he's almost stuck in this situation where instead of realizing that he has a short time and to make the most of it, he's kind of trying to avoid throwing a bunch of picks or making bad decisions, and kind of that's making him play worse, in my opinion. It's almost like he's scared to give up that starting job sooner rather than later, and it's affecting his play. So I just think it's the same Jimmy we've gotten accustomed to seeing. There's nothing really new that I'm seeing there. Again, I want to give him credit, just like you said, he has had some great throws, but it's the hesitation for me. The guy hesitates far too much, and that's the biggest difference between him and Lance. When Lance sees an opening, he takes it. He's going to rifle that ball in there. He has a little bit more arm strength to compensate for being made partially, a little bit late on that read. But I'm seeing Jimmy double clutch the ball too much, and particularly before they were in pads, there were so many plays where, he got the ball out, but if it was a real game with real action, he would have been sacked. Well, he's holding the ball for 5-6 seconds. So that would be my biggest thing, is that I think he needs to shake off whatever hesitation he has and just understand, like, hey, you got a short amount of time here. Let it rip. The rookie's going to replace you eventually. You might as well go out swinging. That would kind of be my, phrasing for that.
I think letting it rip would go a long way for him. So the first practice I saw was on Saturday, and he was playing really, really well, made a mistake, and then went into a shell and just wasn't trying to push the ball at all, wasn't trying to challenge defenders, wasn't trying to throw a ball into tight windows. But he bounced back the next practice. So on Monday, he did the same thing. And after the mistake he made, that's when he was firing into Dwelly. That's when he was firing into these tight windows. And I thought he was really impressive then. But after that, it was back to the same thing where once he makes that first mistake, once he makes that first throw, it seems like he just doesn't want to make a mistake. And I don't know if he feels like he's going to be judged by his head coach, quarterback's coach, offensive coordinator, whoever it may be, but it's really affecting him. And he's just got to let that go. And I don't know if that's going to be the case because he's 29, man. Like at some point, this is who he is. But he can play. The fact is he's just not consistent. And the fact that we're still talking about that, like, it has to worry anybody who's like there watching, because you don't see or you see that with Lance. You don't see Lance having this roller coaster type of performance, man. But let's talk about a couple other positions, because I'm sure we're going to be back to the quarterbacks, and people talk about that ad nauseum. So offensive line, and we've been getting questions about Aaron Banks, 49ers second round pick. He has not worked with the first team at all. And so far, it's been Daniel Brunskill up until Wednesday, and then Mike McDaniel said they're going to rotate the guys and make sure that everybody gets, an even playing field so he can evaluate them. But it wasn't Aaron Banks getting the second turn. It was, what's his name? Who was McKivitz. Colton McKivitz was the next guy up. And after that, he made it sound like, Tom Compton's going to go in, and then they're just kind of waiting for Aaron Banks to eventually start. But what have you seen from Aaron Banks so far?
The first thing I would point out is after what, because I'll be honest, that Banks draft, that pick took me by surprise. I did not think that the Niners would have any kind of interest in a guard that was as big as he was. They've tended to go for the more lighter fleet of foot guards for that outside zone scheme. So when they took Banks, I hadn't really watched much tape on him. And so when I did start going through and doing my homework, the first thing that stood out to me was his size. He is massive. And I think that he got away in college with having so many good pass protection reps because he was so big and hard to move. and occupied so much space. And again, it takes nothing away from his skill, but I think it's very similar to Javon Kinlaw coming out of Carolina, where he won so often with his just sheer size and that bull rush that he didn't really have to go into a deep bag in terms of pass rushing moves. So I'm seeing a similar kind of rough adjustment just on the other side of the line with Banks, where he's a guy that won so often based on his size. And as you know, when you get to the NFL level, you're not the biggest guy out there anymore. You got to adapt and have some sort of, refined skill to back that up. And the other thing I would point out is he looks like he's about 15, 20 pounds lighter than he was when he got drafted. He looks much smaller now. And I don't know if that was something that the 49ers asked him to do, if they were like, hey, we need you to drop down a little bit. It wouldn't surprise me, because while he did look good in space, I thought he was. This is why I didn't think they would take a guy that big. You need a guy that's a little bit fleet of foot, especially getting to the second level with that zone running scheme that they deploy with Kyle Shanahan. So the biggest thing that stands out to me is I think he's just having a tough adjustment. He has been getting beat repeatedly. I wish that wasn't the case, but it's just frankly what I've been seeing is that he just seems to have an issue. And it could just be a situation where he's overthinking things too much. He's having a tough time picking up what he needs to do at this level. But it is early, so I'm not, sitting here, don't want people panicking, thinking the guy's a bust. It's been 1 week of training camp. But I think the 49ers took him and spent that high capital with the hope that he'd be able to come in and start week 1 this year, truthfully. And I don't think Brunskill looked that great with the first team either. So I think that there definitely is a path for Banks to get to that starting job if he can turn it around. But that has to be some area of concern for them, because the fact that they spent that capital, there were a lot of really good players still on the board there. And the fact that they spent that high of a pick on a guard there clearly pointed out to me that they had some concern, particularly with pass protection in that interior. So I just hope that he can turn it around soon, because truthfully, the first week hasn't been very encouraging.
Let's take a break here. So the 49ers, they had a media tour today, and they gave away jerseys for whatever reason. So I am going to give away these jerseys because I have a George Kittle jersey that has the 75 patch on it too. And we're going to give that away this season. And also Nick Bosa jersey that has the same 75 patch on it. And I don't know what I'm going to do. Maybe I'll say something like, if Trey Sermon scores a touchdown, I'll give it away to a random follower. If Fred Warner gets an interception, I'll give it away to a random follower. So that'll be fun. We're going to have some fun with that. But please stay tuned in to us. And we're going to have we're going to be doing contests and giveaways like that all season. So what I want to talk about is Mike McGlinchey, because he is up 25 pounds. And I don't know if it's going to take time for him to get used to playing at that weight. But what we're seeing is a lot of the same as what we saw last year. And I know they practice in pads for 2 to 3 days. But it is concerning because it's the same old. So when will it change? We were talking about it before we got on here. Like, he was getting beat in practice by Arden Key, and he is going to face pass rushers in the NFL who are better than Arden Key. He was just losing to the edge around just with a simple speed move. And he was also getting beat pretty good by Eric Armstead, whether it's with an arm over, whether it's with power. So we already talked about the concerns at right guard, and it's not as if McGlinchey is this bad player, but his losses still, when he loses, he gets whooped. And that means whether it's Jimmy, whether it's Trey, your quarterback is in danger, man. So that right side of the line, and it sucks because Alex Mack never loses. He never gets beat at all. Trent Williams, nothing to worry about. Laken Thompson, sure, here and there, but the difference between the left side of the line and the right side line is it's pretty concerning, man. Should we worry about Mike McGlinchey, or am I overreacting?
So this is what's concerning to me. I think that the biggest thing you pointed out is a lot of the issues that are there are the same issues, and that's what would be concerning. And that's if you get a guy outside his right shoulder that has any kind of burst off the edge, if he gets beat off that first step, he's not great at recovering. And I think that that's a situation where I've seen Ebukam beat him, Arden Key beat him really badly. That's the one that keeps standing out to me. And it seems to be the same. Yeah. And it seems like, that they go, the second they get that outside leverage off his right shoulder, if they get that step on him, he is not great at recovering. And I think that you're right. There could be some adjustment with him getting used to playing at that weight. I thought he was far too skinny last year. It was odd, truthfully, when I saw him come in at the weight he was at. So I think it's good he's bulked up. The other thing I would point out is you're right. Alex Mack has been so good holding down the center that he's made both guard positions look remarkably better because he's cleaning up for a lot of their mistakes.
Right.
But the issue is the right guard play hasn't been great either. And that's something that I've touched on a little bit. I think that right guard play and that inconsistency in the revolving door of players did no favors to Mike McGlinchey. So as much as he may have had his own issues, not having that consistency next to him also caused a lot of problems. That's one thing. I think the left side of the line, obviously having Trent Williams and Joe Staley play there is going to be huge for you, but also having a constant in Laken Tomlinson, who seemingly never misses a snap. Even if he is, I think Laken's around an average league player in terms of a left guard, but he's consistently there and you know what to expect and you start to build that chemistry and rapport with one another. And I think that that's something that's been missing for Mike McGlinchey. If you think about the revolving door of players who've been at that right guard spot the last couple of seasons. So that was another area where I was hoping that maybe Aaron Banks would win that job and you'd start to have a solid right side of the line with Banks and McGlinchey. And all of a sudden that would kind of develop into something a little bit more consistent. So I'm holding off judgment yet because I do think that that is a huge thing. Again, I don't want to be making excuses for him, but I think it has to be really difficult. Every time you look over to your left, it's a different guy taking reps next to you.
Right.
But he needs to work on getting beat to the outside because that's something that's been an issue for years now. And, if we see it, opposing defensive coordinators are going to see it. And with the speed that so many of these defensive ends are playing with now and so many of these pass rushing specialists that other teams are going to play with, you need to have a way to make sure that Mike McGlinchey isn't a weak link on an otherwise really strong offensive line. I thought the first team offensive line was the best unit on the field on Tuesday. They looked great, Mac in particular, and you can't have 1/5 of that group holding everybody else back.
Yeah, the last thing you want is your best weapon, George Kittle, staying in the block because your right tackle can't block, and that just hinders the rest of your offense. So let's talk about the other side of the ball, and maybe this is in defense of Jimmy Garoppolo because when he's out there and he's throwing to the likes of River Craycraft and Richie James, his guys aren't getting open. So maybe if we see, do you think your opinion would change if Trey Lance was doing the same thing and he was having to go against the first team defense and those were his receivers?
Yeah, I feel like it would probably be a little difficult, but the biggest thing for me ultimately is it's just the ball jumps out of Trey's hands in a way that it doesn't jump out of Jimmy's. And that's something I wrote down in my notes. I even write down simple stuff. Like the simple thing for me is the ball comes out of Jimmy's hands. A lot of times it's not a tight spiral coming out. It doesn't really have that velocity where you're seeing it really pop out of his hand. And with Trey, it is. And I think that, yes, obviously throwing to Deebo Samuel and Brandon Ayuk is going to be far more beneficial to a quarterback than throwing to River Craycraft and Richie James and Travis Benjamin and some of these other guys who might be fringe roster players. But the pure talent that's there, it's just evident that one guy has more than the other. And I think that the 49ers are in a great spot because, again, just like KP said, the performance from Jimmy Garoppolo hasn't been bad. This isn't a situation where it's like, oh, no, neither, Jimmy Garoppolo has been so bad that the rookie's going to have to start. It's just been, wow, this is one of the most exceptionally gifted rookies that, a lot of these coaches and players have been around at this early stage of their rookie year in camp. And he's earning the job rather than Jimmy losing the job, in my opinion. And it's a good problem to have two quarterbacks because two good quarterbacks because there's plenty of teams who don't have any on the roster. So I think it's just a situation where Trey's natural talent's going to win out, and it doesn't really matter who is around them.
Yeah, the best way I would describe the quarterback competition right now is like if there were to be a change, the 49ers, they're not taking Jimmy out, they're putting Trey Lance in. And they know what they can get with Lance because, the explosive plays, man, it's going to happen when Trey's in the game. You're just waiting for a big play to happen, and it's fun to watch that. So back to the defense because Tavon Wilson has been getting a lot of love from the coaches, and that was the case on Wednesday from D'Amico Ryans. I asked him, is there anybody who's really surprising you? And he actually said Tavon Wilson. So what have you seen from him so far?
So I thought he's looked great. I thought he's looked very comfortable running with the ones. I thought he's looked good in coverage. He's displayed good sideline to sideline speed. I thought he's looked good in the box against the run. I thought he's getting to spots good because, as we know, these running plays are not tackling anybody. The guys are going to keep going, but he's getting to spots where if it was live action, he would be in good positions. I think he's playing his gap assignments well when he has been in the box. And I just think that he's a guy that, I think Jaquiski Tartt is a great player, but I don't think that it's a guarantee that he comes back and just reclaims the starting job. I think there will be a little bit of a competition for that starting spot opposite Jimmy Ward. He had a great rep right in front of me doing one-on-ones with George Kittle, and he stuck Kittle the whole way, and Kittle tried to throw. I think it was like a double move at him, and he hung with him the whole way, broke up the pass, and then in 11-on-11 yesterday, it looked like a play where he was sitting in the zone in the flat, and Jimmy tried to fit a ball, and I forget who the receiver was, but it looked like Tavon was reading his eyes the whole way, left his assignment to jump the ball, and he almost had a pick. It would have been a pick going back the other way. He dropped it, but it still was a great play, and he's displaying a tremendous amount of football IQ. And he's a veteran who's been in the league for a good amount of time. So I think that's another plus, is that it's a player who has that NFL experience, and I think it's a situation where even if he doesn't beat out Tart, the Niners, just from the looks that I've seen from some of the walkthroughs they're doing, it looks like DeMeco Ryans is comfortable putting 5-6 DBs on the field at a time. So even if Tart's out there too, I could see a situation where you have Ward and Wilson playing cover 2 or sitting in some kind of too high look with Tart closer to the box, where we know he's a great player. And I just think that he's another weapon really for DeMeco Ryans to kind of get very creative. And that's another thing I'd add super quick. I think that DeMeco Ryans is clearly putting his own stamp on this defense. Sure. Well, I think he'll do a lot of the things that were successful under Robert Saleh. He's going to be far more creative, and the looks that they're showing just even through walkthroughs look way more exotic than what we got accustomed to seeing under Robert Saleh.
See, and I'll push back on that, because I think Tart is like an excellent player, and sure, he has to be on the field. He has to be healthy. Nobody knows if he is healthy right now, by the way, because before he went on the reserve COVID list, they were talking about him starting on the PUP list, and that means he would have to miss the first 6 games. And we're talking about a toe injury that happened in November. So like, what the heck is going on, man? But what I think we're seeing out of Tavon Wilson is he would be that extra defensive back in like a dime package, sub package situation where you don't have to worry about Azeez Al-Shire or whoever that third linebacker may be, or shoot, even if they don't want to have Dre Greenlaw on the field, it'd be Warner and a bunch of DBs. And in my opinion, and I mean, this is backed up by their EPA as well, the 49ers are at their best when they have Fred Warner and all DBs on the field. Like, that's when they are just faster than everybody. They can run people down. So that's what I would look forward to. But DeMeco Ryans was talking about his communication and his leadership. So what I've seen is, like, he's talking trash to people, but at the same time, if a receiver messes up, he's going to tell them, hey, maybe do this, do that. And the same applies for the DBs as well. So he's always communicating. You can see him in the play, mid-play, even pre-snap, where he's pointing at different directions, making sure everybody's lined up well. So that goes a long way. And since we're talking about safeties and one-on-ones, by the way, nobody can guard George Kittle. So the fact that he can break up a pass, that means a lot. But the best one-on-one player on this team is Jimmy Ward, and I don't think that's close, man. He just shuts down everybody, whether it's Debo, whether it's Ayuk, you name it. He's the best coverage player on the team, and that number 1 looks really, really good. So having him and Jason Verrett has been great because, I mean, shoot, it feels like Jason Verrett is like wide receiver 3 for how many passes that he's got his hands on so far. But there is a problem on the other side, and that's probably why we're seeing so many big plays in the second team, because you have the rookies. You have Diamador Lenore, you have Ambry Thomas, and the 2 safeties, the USC guy, and then you have Tony Jefferson. And that's where Lance is getting all these big plays from. So one of those guys are probably going to have to play if we don't see Emmanuel Moseley anytime soon. It's been over a week, so you would imagine that they're just not vaccinated because they have to wait out 10 days if you're not vaccinated to come back. But, yeah, if Moseley can't play, if Moseley doesn't return anytime soon, there is a problem at cornerback because these guys are getting toasted every time. And even Ken Webster, like, he's the guy who's been filling in when Dante Johnson isn't there. So what have you seen from the secondary? Because in my mind, from what I've seen, it is not pretty outside of number 1 and number 2.
So that's exactly it. You just hit the nail on the head. Ward and Verrett just look phenomenal. They both look like guys that are playing at elite levels, top 7 to 10 at their positions. Ward probably a little bit closer. I think Ward's top 5 easy. But those guys are handling their assignments. They're playing much, much better than the rest of the players in that secondary and covering up for a lot of mistakes made by other players. It's really been a revolving door opposite Jason Verrett. We've seen Dante Johnson getting looks there. We saw Tim Harris getting a lot of looks there before he got cut. And then Ken Webster was taking the reps yesterday, and he actually had 2 pass breakups during 11-on-11s. I wasn't watching him too closely the entire time, but the reps I did watch, he looked better than Dante Johnson or Tim Harris had before him. So that was an encouraging sign to me, but he's not a guy that I would feel great about starting week 1 with the ones. I think he's fine as a depth piece currently. Lenore has looked really good too. I think that, again, it's a situation where he's a rookie. He's going to have a little bit of an adjustment. but he's looked far better, in my opinion, than Ambry Thomas has, which is, I don't say it's concerning, but Ambry Thomas was obviously taken much earlier in the draft.
Right.
And I think Lenore between those two has looked far better between those two rookie DBs. And it's just a situation where you really have to bank on, just like you said, Emmanuel Moseley coming back and playing and staying healthy, because right now I think it's a situation where, it's just like I said, if we can see it, opposing teams are going to see it. And I think it'll be just like it was kind of last season to start the year, where I don't think Moseley was bad by any stretch, but it was very clear that teams weren't going to throw at Sherman when he was healthy to start. And then when Verrett was coming in and playing very well, and it seemed like teams just kind of picked on the weak link in the secondary over and over and over again. And if you're throwing out Ken Webster or Ambry Thomas or one of these guys, I just don't see a scenario where opposing offensive coordinators aren't salivating at the opportunity to just target these guys 15, 20 times a game. So that corner spot opposite Verrett is the biggest thing for me, because K'Wan Williams, another guy who kind of flies under the radar sometimes, I think he's looked great. He's a seasoned vet. He knows what he needs to do. I think he's looked good in 11-on-11s as well. So the safety spots, Verrett, Williams, they all look fine to me. It's more so the depth, and then whoever ends up at that corner spot opposite Verrett, because I think they're naturally just going to receive a lot of target volume based on the fact that everybody else is so good that you'd almost be foolish to not try and target whoever ends up starting in that spot.
Right. I asked D'Amico Ryan, like, hey, is there a situation where you guys use Verrett to travel with the other team's best players? Because what Arizona did last year, they wanted to go away from Richard Sherman. So it was like Moseley, like 15 times, which is unreal. And they didn't make an adjustment, which, okay. But yeah, that can't happen. And Ryan said there will be an opportunity for Verrett to travel, but that's not something that they're going to do every game, which makes sense to me. But still, teams are going to pick on whoever that other cornerback is. So yeah, Moseley, get well soon. Let's move to the linebackers. Don't have to waste too much time on number 54. For those who have not seen any training camp practices, Fred Warner, still good, still makes plays, still does everything that you thought, and it might be even better. My only takeaway from Fred Warner is there is no way he's his listed height. I think that he's on stilts because he looks much taller, and he's always making plays. He just looks like he's 6'6" to me, man.
Yeah, he's worth every penny the Niners paid. And I honestly, at first I was kind of like, I love Fred paying a linebacker that much, but you have to look at so many of the things he does in coverage as well. And I think he's kind of the first real mold of this hybrid linebacker safety that's actually going to be a 3-down player and not, like a Mark Barron or some of these other guys we've seen that have been kind of tweeners. He's a player that is just as valuable in coverage as he is in the box, and now seemingly as a pass rusher as well. So yeah, I think that the Niners did a fantastic job locking him up as part of their core moving forward, because he is just a treat to watch every time you see him take the field.
Yeah, you see the difference. And that's why I ask you if there would be a difference for, because Jimmy going against the first team and Trey going against the first team. So having Fred Warner over the middle, you see how he reacts to the crossing routes. Like there's nothing. They're giving up nothing. And you would imagine that he would be able to bait maybe Lance into making a mistake. So that's something that I can't wait to see. But there are a lot of other linebackers making plays. So Azeez Al-Shaair, he went down with a knee injury. Thankfully, it's not going to be serious. He's only going to miss a few weeks. But in his absence, Demetrius Flanagan-Foles has been the starter. But a guy that's really stood out to me, number 53, Jonas Griffith. He's probably more of a thumper, probably not as agile and loose, I guess, as you would describe him, than the other linebackers, but he's just making plays, man. He finds a ball. He had an interception against Lance, and he always seems to be around the ball. That's a guy who might be pushing either Al-Shaair or Demetrius Flanagan-Foles for snaps. But is there anybody that you've seen in that linebacker core just so far through the first week?
Well, so you mentioned him, but I just have to give him a shout out. I thought Azeez Al-Shaair was having a fantastic camp before he got hurt. I thought he looked great. And I'm not going to lie, I was horrified when I saw him go down at first. I'm really glad to hear that he is hopefully going to be back relatively soon, and it's nothing long term. I thought he was phenomenal. I'm a huge fan of Demetrius Flanagan-Fowles. He has had a couple rough reps in 11-on-11s. He has good. The thing that's great about this Niners linebacking unit for the most part on the top end, Fred Warner, Dre Greenlaw, Flanagan-Fowles, Al-Shaair, these guys are all so fast sideline to sideline. And they do sacrifice a little bit of that thumping ability in the box and that, kind of brute strength for that sideline to sideline speed. But it translates so well when these guys are in coverage, I feel like. So that's where it gets interesting, because I agree with you. I thought that Griffith has easily been the best of that next grouping of linebackers. I've thought Elijah Sullivan has looked good as well. He's had moments here and there where he flashed. A guy that's been a little disappointing, in my opinion, has been Hilliard. I think that he is a guy where it's very clear how much less speed he possesses than the rest of the linebackers, as he's repeatedly getting beat in spots where they're not.
Yeah.
And I've caught him flat-footed a couple times. And he's the guy where I look at and I'm like, man, 10 years ago, he probably would have been fighting for a roster spot. He's great within the box. He's a guy that I could see being a secondary inside backer in like a 3-4 or something like that, maybe 10, 11 years. He's a guy who would have been great under Jim Harbaugh, in my opinion. He would have probably made the team if Jim Harbaugh was still coaching 10 years ago. But with this new age, with the speed that you need at that position, I just don't see it working out. And I know he's a guy that a lot of people were really excited about when he signed as an undrafted free agent. But yeah, to me, it's pretty much the four I mentioned. It's Al-Shaair, Flanagan, Fowles, Greenlaw, and Warner. And then I think Griffith has a chance to push for a roster spot because I think he could contribute on special teams as well. But to me, I don't see anybody else that's really, jumping out at me. I will add real quick too. I know you've noticed they've been having Marcel Harris taking reps at linebacker. He's been working with the linebackers in individual position drills. And I think that that's it's good that they're taking this chance because I think Harris has played very well within the box, but he's been, in my opinion, a liability in coverage. Right. So if they can get him in a position where he's covering a little bit more in the shorter area and playing within the box, maybe he sticks as somebody who makes the roster as well. But I think it's going to be tough because, he's going up against some of these guys who not only have years in the system, but also have many more years playing the position itself. So that's another thing to watch is the development of Marcel Harris as he transitions from safety to linebacker.
Yeah, so he's been working, and he was working with the linebackers a little bit last year in practice, but obviously they had injuries, so he bounced back to safety. But it would be tough for Marcel Harris to make the roster. I think this is basically the team giving him one last chance to say, hey, man, this is what we think you do well. Go get it. But he's very good at going forward. The problem is when he has to turn and run, and that's where some of the big plays that you see Lance have, or even Sudfield or Rosen in the backups, and they're kind of picking on him because you can tell he's just not used to doing that. So the one reason that CB2 or whoever is opposite of Jason Verrett won't be an issue is because of the 49ers defensive line. So we have not seen Nick Bosa yet. We have seen Dee Ford, and when Dee Ford is out there, he looks like the Dee Ford you expect Dee Ford to look like, which is very promising because think about it in March, man. Nobody thought he was going to be able to do anything. People thought he was going to retire. Then they work out a new contract. You get him out here on the field, and he looks fresh. He looks like a guy. Well, to be fair, he looks like a guy who didn't play football last year, and that's why. He looks explosive. He looks quick. He's beaten McGlinchey a couple times. And he's also he's not just a pass rusher. I think he does a really good job. He's very underrated against the run. He does a really good job of setting the edge and not letting players get outside of him. But you can go up and down the defensive line. So I mentioned that Armstead makes a couple plays against McGlinchey, but the interior guys, like you have Maurice Hurst stands out every now and then. DJ Jones is just an underrated player. He's not going to be the guy that racks up a bunch of sacks, so he might not get the type of hype you want, but he's clearly one of the better players along the defensive line. So, who's been standing out to you up front?
So the main guys that have really jumped out to me, I think Zach Kerr was a great pickup. He's looked good. Kevin Givens has looked really good. Contavious Street has looked great. And, he's been around for a while, but DJ Jones looks great as well. DJ Jones is a guy that I think, I personally think he's up there. I think Jimmy Ward's getting enough love now. Somebody made that point to me when I mentioned that I thought he was still underrated, that, no, he's kind of getting enough love now that maybe he isn't. I think DJ Jones is in the conversation for the most underrated player on the team. He's a guy who just consistently, to me, is in the right spots. He's consistently working these guys on the interior, winning his reps in the right spots. And it's such a, there's nothing flashy about it. He's just a guy that's solid and consistently doing what's asked of him. And he had a couple really good reps in 11-on-11s. I think it was Tuesday. I had in my notes. He looked really good. Contavious Street, again, is a guy who's flashed. And it's been really interesting because they've been moving him kind of all over. They've had him play at end. They've had him play on the interior at 3-tech. They're moving him on the right side, left side. They're kind of moving him all over the place. So he's displaying some versatility. And then Kevin Givens is another guy. I know he had a good year last year, and he kind of popped up on everybody's radar with the success that he had while he was playing in place of some guys who were hurt last year. But he has just a tremendous amount of burst, especially when he's rushing out of that 3-tech spot on the interior. I saw them get really creative with a few of the stunts they were running with him. And there was one in particular, I think I mentioned to you when we were talking, where he just exploded from the left side in the 3-tech position and came all the way around to rush the left tackle. And he has like a tremendous amount of burst to him. And that's the thing that's really standing out to me with the group as a whole is these guys are all very large, but they all possess a tremendous amount of burst off the line. And I think a lot of that can be attributed to the work that they're doing with Chris Kosarek and that, defensive line, all those drills they're running, is that these guys all really just have this get up off the line that you don't see. Like, I've watched a lot of tape of Hurst and some of these guys, Key and some of these guys when they were with the Raiders, and I'm not seeing that same burst that I'm seeing now. So whatever the Niners defensive staff is doing clearly seems to be working, because I think far and away that defensive line is the strongest group on the team. Like, if they end up carrying 10 like they did in 2019, I think that 1 through 10, while they may not have the 1 through 4 that they had with D Ford and Buckner and Bosa and Armstead, the 1 through 10, just the depth of that unit is significantly deeper than that team that went to the Super Bowl, essentially on the back of that defensive line, in my opinion. The team as a whole played really well, but I think that everybody would kind of agree the defensive line led the charge. So that to me is very encouraging, because they obviously have past success with the defensive line being the backbone of that defense. And I think we're going to see that again this year.
Yeah, and they're just going to embarrass people, man. They're going to kill people, and it's probably going to be a reason that they win a couple games, just because they are so deep. And I think having the defensive tackles only play like 20, 25 snaps, being able to keep them fresh will go a long way, and not just at the beginning of the season. Because if you remember in 2019, like, Eric Armstead was balling at first. And by the way, he's been working with the defensive tackles in individual drills, so that's promising. But he kind of wore out as the season went along. So keeping him fresh will be a big deal. But we have a question from Tony here who asks, who on the defensive line is on the outside looking in when cuts happen? And that's a good question, because they are deep, and they are going to have to cut if they don't keep a player. Like, for example, in my mind, Kentavious Street is on the outside looking in. Based on, I know you just said he's looking good, but think about the names that are in front of him. So Nick Bosa, D Ford, Javon Kinlaw, who we haven't talked about yet because he was he was pouting for a lot of practice on Wednesday, because I don't know if he was hurt or what, but he was just on a knee for the entire time. But when he was in there, he makes plays. He looks quick. He looks rangier, I guess is a better way that I would describe Kinlaw. So you have Bosa, Ford, Kinlaw, DJ Jones, Eric Armstead, and we haven't even talked about Samson Ebukam, who has been playing edge as well. Then you have Mo Hurst, Arden Key, Kevin Givens, Zach Kerr, Kentavious Street. Like, one of those guys is not going to make the roster. So who do you think is on the outside looking in? Because I lean Kentavious Street, but Zach Kerr, he, for whatever reason, he's working with the 2s and sometimes the 3s, and he doesn't get as many reps. So that would be the one reason he wouldn't make it, just from a rep standpoint. But they'll have a chance to make their name in the preseason, and it's going to come down to whoever makes the most plays there. But my answer to that question would be Kentavious Street, because I really like Mo Hurst.
Yeah, and I'd have to agree. I think Givens is a guy they'll end up keeping just because he's familiar with the scheme. He's had the experience. This is definitely going to be the hardest cuts they have to make in camp, because I think that you can't carry 13 defensive linemen, but there are easily 13 guys, in my opinion, that belong on an NFL roster that are in that grouping now. So Street is a guy I could see ultimately, because my whole thing is that, like, Zach Kerr, even though he has been running with the 2s and 3s, the tape I've seen with him in Carolina, he looks like a player who belongs on an NFL team in that rotation. While he may not be a guy getting starter reps, I think he's a guy who definitely deserves a spot on a roster. I really like Kentavious Street coming out of North Carolina State, but I also don't think he's a guy that I can objectively sit here and say, hey, I've seen enough from him that I think he belongs on an NFL roster. And as great as I think he's looked during training camp, there's a huge difference between the first week of August and playing in the middle of, an NFL season. And I think that I would much rather take the chance on a Mo Hurst, on a Zach Kerr, on some of these guys, and Kevin Givens I'd lump in as well, guys who have that NFL experience. And just like you pointed out, we didn't even talk about Ebukam. Ebukam, Key, and a couple of these guys are going to have to make the team regardless, because the interior depth is great, but they still need guys who are going to come in and rush off the edge, particularly because I think they're going to have some sort of plan to I don't want to say limit, but make sure that they're not overutilizing Nick Bosa as he comes back from that ACL injury he suffered last year. So I think that they'd be wise to maybe carry a guy who can do a little bit of both from the edge and the interior. And I think that Givens is a guy who, while he's playing majority of his reps from the inside, he could hypothetically play on the outside. I would be fine with him playing an edge role on base downs. I just don't know that I would feel great about cutting guys with NFL experience and keeping street and then ultimately regretting that down the line.
For sure. And with the new, practice, or they're carrying over the practice squad rules from last year with the COVID. So the practice squad will be expanded, and that should help the 49ers. So let's do this. Let's run through each position group, say who's a winner, who's a loser, maybe who's the best, who's the worst, however you want to phrase it. I'll start. So we'll start with safeties. Jimmy Ward, don't have to spend too much time on that. Probably the best player, one of the best players on the defense. He just makes plays. He doesn't give up the big play. Whereas a guy like Jared Maiden, he is always, chasing, and you don't want that. I remember one play specifically, he had an opportunity. So it was him and Lance in the open field. He could have cut him off. Lance beats his angle, gets to the end zone. So I think Jared Maiden's going to be on the outside looking in for safety. Do you have any new takes for the safeties?
I would just say I would change my winner to Tavon Wilson just because I think Jimmy Ward has proven that he's been so good. But I agree with you on Maiden. I just don't see a way how he makes the team. He's not looked great.
Cornerback, you start.
I would say winner. I would go Demo Lenore, and I think because he has just looked so good as a rookie, and he's made a couple big plays in my opinion, where it's just a little thing, just getting his head turned around downfield. He had a great pass breakup on a ball that was, I think it was Rosen to Kevin White. That was a deep ball about 40 yards down the right sideline. And just having the awareness to get his head around, make a play on the ball without interfering with the receiver to the point where you're getting a PI called on you. He's just looked really good for somebody that is new to the NFL. And he to me looks like a guy who is forcing his way into a roster spot where he's going to make the 49ers have to make a tough decision with some guys that I think they took ahead of him. Like I said, he's played a lot better than Ambry Thomas, in my opinion. If it comes down to one or two of those guys making the roster, I would take Lenore easily right now without thinking twice. And then lose. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
No, I was just going to say with Ambry Thomas, if they have to play him early, and yes, it's August 5, but if they have to play him based on what we've seen, like that will be an issue because what Brandon Ayuk has done to him should not be legal because it is bad, and he's been undressing him. Go ahead. Who is your loser?
So that parlays right into it. Ambry Thomas would be my loser, honestly. And it's just because I think that when you take a guy that early, especially when you take a guy, it's a third-round pick still. And I understand it's not a guy you took in the top 10, but a third-round pick is still relatively high. And I think that the expectation was that he would be able to come in. As I'm sure you've seen, it seems like the 49ers are much more keen on running a lot more man than they ran under Robert Saleh, with DeMeco Ryans as the coordinator now. And that seemed to be Ambry Thomas's big strength coming out from the tape I saw, which he did look good for a lot of his press man reps. But I think it's just he's getting beaten so consistently. And it is, Brandon Ayuk is a fantastic receiver, but it's also guys on the second team beating him. And it seems like so many of these times I'm looking up when there's a big play in 11 on 11, the guy who's sitting there, and it's not just, like he's the nearest defender in zone. It's man coverage where he's getting beat repeatedly. And that's what he's supposed to be. That's supposed to be a strength coming out. So that would be my biggest concern. And I know that he has the return ability as well, but I'm not going to waste a roster spot on a guy who can't cover just because he can return punts. You can find plenty of players who are good at returning punts. So that would be my biggest concern because I think that there was an expectation that he would be able to play fairly early on based on that, the capital that they spent to get him. And I just haven't seen him really live up to where I think he was picked. And again, it's the first week, but it just hasn't been very encouraging.
The only thing that I would say about Lenore is he just needs to get a little more comfortable finding the ball in the air because he's doing a good job of staying in phase, and Thomas has not, which has been an issue. And that's why they have thrown him out, and they've thrown all these guys out there with the first team. So I think just with more reps, Lenore has a chance to be like a quality player. And even if he turns into like a slot cornerback that is K'Wan Williams, like that's fine because all of these guys are going to be off the roster. Well, not all of these guys, like Mosley and K'Wan Williams, like they're on 1-year deals, and even Verrett. So they're going to have somebody, one of these young guys, step up. So hopefully that is Lenore. Shoot, hopefully it's Thomas, man. Hopefully he evolves. But linebacker, pretty cut and dry. We just pretty much talked about that. I think we both agree that it's Jonas Griffith. Do you have a guy or you said Hilliard, that's going to be your guy. Is there anybody on the defensive line before we go back to the offensive side of the ball?
I would just say big winner. Actually, I would give a shout out to Arden Key. I think Arden Key has looked great, especially in 11 on 11s. I don't say it's easy, but it's much better. I think to look better when you're running these one-on-one reps. But with the 11 on 11 drills, he's looked really good. And he's had some flashes where I'm sitting here and I've watched 2 decades in a row of the Raiders' decision making not really be great in terms of personnel standpoint. But I'm wondering how they let both these guys out of the building for nothing. Between him and Mo Hurst being those guys, and he looks great. He looks like a guy who's I pretty much have Arden Key as a roster lock because there's not much depth at edge, and he's playing that well. He's a guy that I haven't seen too much come out about in terms of reports from camp, and I just think that he deserves some praise because he's looked really good.
Teg Wynn of The Athletic on Wednesday said that the Raiders fear that Solomon Thomas is not big enough to play 3 technique, and they are regretting letting go Mo Hurst. That is like a double win for the 49ers. Like, who could have saw that coming? But anyway, this isn't to pile on Solomon Thomas. I actually hope he does well. Back to the offensive side of the ball. Tight end. Jordan Matthews, fresh face, had a strong day Wednesday. But before then, like Ross Dwelly was balling out as well. So they have, just between those two and obviously Kittle. So up until Wednesday, Kittle had 2 catches in team drills. And then he had like 4 or 5 yesterday. And it wasn't just like quick out routes or stick routes. He's making plays down the field. He's going up and getting on seam routes, wheel routes. It's just fun to watch him just be an athlete, I guess. And when he scores, like he talks trash. He lets you know about it, and the defense hates every second of it. So that's why it's probably easy to root for Kittle. Who would you say the standout is in the tight end room?
I agree with you. Dwelly's looked really well, but I think Dwelly has proven for a couple of years he belongs. I think Jordan Matthews is really impressive for a guy that just kind of, just came onto the scene a couple of days ago as a tight end. I know he was getting some work in at that tight end university that Kittle ran with Kelsey about a month ago, but he's a guy who he always has had the talent, in my opinion. It's an inconsistency thing with him, and he looks good bulked up. And I think if he's a guy that you have come in as a rotational guy, or maybe you have him as in that big slot role, he looked really good in the red zone reps, in my opinion. That's where I really think he shined. And I think that's an issue where the 49ers have been, I don't say they've been neglecting, but there's been a problem where there hasn't been a prominent red zone target, I feel like, for this team for a couple seasons now. And maybe if Matthews can fill a specialist role where he is that 3rd or 4th tight end and he is able to be a big target in the short area and the red zone, I think that would go a long way for them.
All right, now the big one, and we haven't really talked about this. So early on in camp, Mohamed Sanu was getting a lot of love, and we thought that, he's going to run away with the wide receiver 3 position, but he kind of cooled off. He hasn't made as many plays since then, and he just looks like Mohamed Sanu, where a guy that most of his routes either come on, either RPOs or just slants, quick posts, whatever it may be. And then Trent Sherfield, and Trent Sherfield has kind of taken the reins since then. So when Deebo Samuel sat out of practice, Sherfield made, and that's when, Trey Lance had that pro day throw. Sherfield, but he's been pretty consistent. He has strong hands. He's reliable. And George Kittle talked about having practices where you just want to stack good days in a row. And that's what it seems that Sherfield has done. So I really like him, man. I think that he's in our wide receiver 3. I think that the Cardinals were probably a little premature to cast him off because he really didn't do anything in Arizona, but he talked about how he's ready to get out of there. And he called John Lynch and was on a plane the next day to sign with him. So I would say the guy that stood out for the most is Trent Sherfield. And on the opposite direction, I actually think he is I would say Richie James, just because he's just not consistent, man. And it's maddening because he has the speed where he can beat you deep, but you just don't know if he's going to catch the ball. When you don't know if a guy's going to catch the ball, you're probably not going to throw him the ball. So I think Richie James still makes the team because he does have special teams value, and he is still, the starting returner as of today, even though it should be Brandon Ayuk. And I know that pisses people off, but I don't know, man. Richie James just leaves a lot to be desired in the consistency field. And Sherfield doesn't. Like, what you're getting with him. And for what it's worth, like, he's a fast dude too. Like, he can run. So who's standing out to you on the wide receiver side?
So I don't want to just echo everything that you say, but Sherfield far and away has been the best guy after the first 2 in Deebo and Ayuk. I think that Sanu has looked good. Like, he's been solid. He doesn't have the same burst that Sherfield does after the catch. That's the biggest thing for me, is that Sherfield's doing such a good job working these crossing routes, these in-breaking routes, and he looks very confident over the middle. He doesn't shy away from contact. He's not a guy that's getting spooked with defenders creeping up as he's waiting for the ball. And he just looks like he belongs. And I know he started to get reps with the first team when Deebo was out with that groin tightness on Tuesday, I believe. But when he continued to get those reps Wednesday when Deebo was back, he just looks comfortable with that unit. The moment wasn't too big for him. He looked like a guy that was ready to step up. So he looks really good to me. I'm hoping to see a little bit more out of Austin Watkins. I really like him. He had that back right corner of the end zone, that pylon grab from Trey Lance that is now circulating. I'm seeing on Twitter, which I thought was one of the best throws of camp. I'm hoping he can pick it up a bit more. The guy that I would say is the most disappointing is it's probably River Craft, in my opinion. And it's just because I thought that he had the short area quickness and the route running savvy to make the roster as a 4th or 5th wide receiver. And he just hasn't done enough, in my opinion, just from watching him, that would make me feel confident about him making the roster at this point. I think coming in, I wouldn't have put Trent Sherfield ahead of him before watching either of them play live in camp. And Sherfield jumped him fairly easily. And I think that some of these other guys behind him might end up doing the same. So I expected a little bit more from him based on what I saw last season.
Yeah, when you can't create separation, you have to win those contested scenarios. You have to win those opportunity balls. And Craig Craft, he just hasn't done that. So he's probably not going to make the roster unless he just balls out on special teams in the preseason or just, makes a bunch of plays on offense. So let's go to the offensive line. And I mean, again, we've pretty much talked about this. I think would we both agree that the standout Alex Mack, and I mean whether it's I think it's Mike McGlinchey on the downside, but do you have anybody else?
I would say Trent Williams is another guy. He's so good that sometimes we just, we know he's that good, so we don't talk about it. But he is just so impressive to watch. He had a rep where he just absolutely – D Ford has looked good. I don't doubt that he's not, he's not 2019 fully, D Ford at 100% when we saw him terrorizing opposing offensive lines in 2019. But he's looked pretty explosive. And there was a couple reps where Trent Williams just absolutely neutral. Like, he took him completely out of the play. And he, to me, is a guy that's just – it's poetic watching him. Like, he's so big. He's so fast. He's so agile. Guys that big should not be able to move the way he does. And he also comes with so much football IQ that I think it's not glamorous to talk about, like, the line play or talk about guys in the trenches. But Trent Williams, to me, is like, he plays like a top 10 player in the NFL. Like, he is so damn good at what he does. And I think that sometimes we tend to overlook because we've been so used to him being good. It's the same thing with Joe Staley, I felt like, where we were so used to him being so good at that left tackle spot that we tend to gloss over it. And when you play, Alex Mack deserves all the praise he's been getting, obviously. I'm not disputing that. But I think Trent Williams has arguably been the best player on the line as well, right there with him. Like, he's just been phenomenal. And I can't think of a time where I saw him get beat in 11-on-11. Like, I'm sure there may have been one, but off the top of my head, there's nothing I'm going back on where I'm like, oh, man, Trent Williams got beat bad on that. I've watched every other lineman on that line get beat that I can recall at least one play. Trent Williams, I can't think of a single one.
I can think of 2 plays that he was beat. So Dre Greenlaw slipped a block on a wide zone play or sweep play, whatever it was. And there was another play where he lost. So 2 plays in a week where Trent Williams has lost. Should the 49ers cut Trent Williams? To me, he's the best player on the team. And when I say that, people are like, as long as Bosa's on the team, he's the best. Nope. I've seen Trent Williams go up against Nick Bosa, and I've seen the results. Trent Williams won every single time. He is the best player, and I'm not sure that it's close. Yeah, there's no way for us to really gauge that because we don't have stats like tackles for loss or QB hits or whatever it may be, win percentage. But, yeah, man, there's just no beating Trent Williams. And when he does lose, it's like, whoa, what just happened? Because I remember tweeting this out. Zettel beat him in one-on-ones the other day on a nice little spin move. And you saw the coach go great. This never happens. They didn't know what to do. So that tells you the type of player Trent Williams is because they ran it back and then he just kind of put him in the dirt, man, which was funny. But running backs, and it's tough to talk about them just because, for the longest, there hasn't really, they can't get tackled. So we can't really evaluate them. And Mike McDaniel talked about that a little bit where we can only really evaluate the running backs in the games. I think what you do see, though, from Trey Sermon is he has really good balance. So the vision is there, and that's not really a surprise. But he has really incredible balance. And I've seen a couple times where you thought he may go down, but he puts his hand on the ground and he just keeps going. Or he just, he stumbles a little bit and remains on his feet. So he's going to be a really valuable back for the 49ers. He's not going to be a guy that rushes for, has those long gains that Mostert does, but he's going to be a guy that gives you 4, 5, 6. And some of those 6s turn into 12s, and some of those 12s might turn into 30s. But that's going to be really good for them. And he's received the bulk of the first team carries, but he deserves it as well. I think what I'm really interested to see is which running back steps up in pass protection? Who's going to be the third down back? Because there's no way for us to know that yet. Maybe it's Elijah Mitchell. Maybe it's Wayne Gallman. Perhaps it's Mostert. But I think it's going to be Sermon just because he's the best all-around back, I imagine. Him and Mostert are going to be a really good 1-2 punch. And I think they have the ability to be like a Reggie Bush, Lindell White combo.
Yeah, the balance is something that just can't be overstated. If you go back and you watch his tape, in particular in like big games like the Big Ten championship, those college football playoff games when they're playing against really high levels of competition, really good defenses, his ability to keep that low center of gravity and maintain his balance after contact is insane. He has a very similar ability to what it reminds me a lot of Frank Gore, where when he's going down, he's really good at driving that left arm into the ground and maintaining his balance and staying on his feet while moving forward. And just like you said, he may not be ripping off these massive, 50, 60-yard home run touchdowns where he's, blowing everybody away with his speed. But it's very valuable to have a guy that's able to eat up 4, 5, 6 yards consistently. And I think that that's something that the Niners have kind of been missing. The closest they've had to that, in my opinion, has been Jeff Wilson. And obviously with him being unavailable due to that meniscus injury, there's a big role to be filled there. And I think that, if everybody was healthy, I think Jeff Wilson would be the third down back because I think he is the best in pass protection personally. And I think that he's a plus receiver who doesn't get enough credit for his receiving ability. But with him being out, Sermon has the size and the profile, I think, of a guy you'd want back there in pass protection. I think Elijah Mitchell has been the best receiver personally out of all the backs. I think he's looked explosive coming out of the backfield, but I haven't seen him take enough pass protection reps to feel great about that. And unfortunately, it seemed like when he was at Louisiana, out of all the tape I watched, he was running most of the time. He wasn't really back there doing a lot of pass protecting. So I would have to lean Sermon as well for now, just because I think his size profile is close to what I think Wilson gave them, where I thought Wilson was pretty good in pass protection the last couple of years personally. But yeah, I'm with you. I think it's just going to be a situation where whoever the hot hand is, Shanahan's going to ride with. But I think it's going to be similar to more so 2019 than 2020, when we saw Tevin Coleman come out for the first series of the game and was the guy who was the starter, for lack of a better word, even though he may not be the guy getting the most carries in a game. I think Sermon will take that similar role, but he has so much ability that it wouldn't surprise me if he's getting, a slightly bigger carry share than a guy like Mostert. But ultimately, if you have a guy that's eating up 4, 5, 6 yards, bouncing off defenders, wearing them down, and then you swap them out for Mostert on a carry here or there, then I think it's going to open up a lot more of those chunk plays for Mostert. So yeah, I'm totally with you. I think that kind of dynamic will be a lot similar to what Kyle had in Atlanta with Tevin Coleman and Devonta Freeman, where both guys have a different kind of skill set, but they play off each other so well, and it just creates havoc for the defense over the course of 60 minutes during a game.
It'll be fun to see both of them in the game at the same time. Like, I'm sure Shanahan will do that because we saw that with Coleman and we saw that with Freeman. What I really want to see is Mitchell in a game, because I think that's where he's really going to pop. I think a game setting, like with his speed, with being able to get him in the passing game, being able to get him in space, that's where he'll really take off, because like he hasn't really stood out in practice, but he doesn't seem like a practice setting type of back. So keep an eye out for Elijah Mitchell once the game happens. So, all right, quarterbacks. We don't have to talk about who's been the best. We don't have to talk about who's been the worst. What has to happen? Like, what does Trey Lance have to do to start to get more first team rep, or start to get a plural first team rep, because it's only been one, and that was on a designed run play. So it could be as simple as playing a preseason game, making a bunch of plays to where Kyle Shanahan doesn't pull him off the field. It could just be doing, continuing to stack practice on top of each other, because they're trending in the opposite directions right now. I've been pretty cautious about, saying that Lance is the chosen one, saying that he's the next great, because he's doing it against the second team. But it's gotten to the point where everything he's doing is really freaking impressive. Like, he's faster than everybody. He has a super, super strong arm. And if you read his scouting reports coming out of college, you would think he's like this horribly accurate passer or inaccurate passer. And that's just not the case, because he's hitting guys in stride. He's just playing with a lot more confidence. And the other guy, Jimmy G, has not been. But to be fair, or just talking about the other guys as well, because people do care about Nate Sudfeld, and they do care about Josh Rosen. Josh Rosen is not the guy. He suffers from staring down receivers, still a little iffy in the pocket. I think we've probably seen the last of Josh Rosen. I mean, sure, that could change in the preseason, but it's pretty evident that it's going to be Sudfeld and Jimmy G and Trey Lance. But what are you looking forward to seeing in the preseason?
So my biggest thing is I think, Trey Lance clearly has the best arm talent of the group. He's the fastest. He can open up what the offense can do more than any of the other quarterbacks. We've seen how much trouble for the second team defense, just like you said, the second team defense has had when they've ran these zone read concepts, and he does so many little things well. I did a thread on Twitter when I was watching some of his film about 2 weeks ago when I had some free time. And one thing that really stood out to me when he was at North Dakota State was he's really good at selling ball fakes. And it may seem like a small thing, and I know it's not, the glamorous thing you want to talk about with quarterbacks. We want to see big chunk plays and throwing on the run and all these things. But the ability to really sell a ball fake and have especially when a defense has to respect your ability to keep the ball and run a naked boot or keep on a zone read, it really has put a lot of stress onto the defense. There was one play in particular I remember where it was a carry to Elijah Mitchell, I believe, on his zone read, where he ultimately ended up giving the ball off, but he held the ball in Mitchell's stomach for so long while he was moving forward with him a little bit. He was kind of stuttering to the side, and the defense was so hesitant to crash on the running back because they've been getting gashed repeatedly by Lance keeping on this same play, that it really started. You start to really, you're playing mind games with the defense, honestly, at that point, where your ability to sell these fakes and not tip what you're doing with the ball, and especially when these guys have to make these reactions in real time on the defensive side. So he's doing so many of these little things really well, is my point. The thing I would like to see him do consistently, and I think will ultimately win Kyle Shanahan over to the point that he's going to put him into that starting role, is continue to work through his progressions. Because I think that that's one area I always hear people say, with Jimmy, it's just injuries and it's just, he's not the strongest arm, but it's just injuries. He's really strong mentally. And I cannot disagree more. I think one of the biggest problems with Garoppolo is that there are times where he doesn't go through his progressions well. He doesn't see the secondary and third options in this passing, in these passing concepts and in this passing offense. And I think that's one thing that Kyle Shanahan is very good at designing and calling plays. And he's going to get guys open. It's just a matter of not sticking on one read too long and also not moving off of a read too long. And I've noticed from Trey Lance, out of all four quarterbacks, he's been the best at working through those progressions. And it's little things like that to me that I think are going to win Kyle over more so than a deep bomb to Trent Sherfield off his back foot or any of these things that we as fans, the fans are going to eat up because it's fun to watch. But these little things that kind of will go a long way. If he continues to sell these ball fakes, if he continues to, have good pre-snap huddle cadence and have good identification of what a defense is trying to run pre-snap, if he's doing well with his audibles, all these little things, if he continues to do well with that, there's no argument about the talent. I think it's just ultimately, just like you said, they're trending in different directions. It's how long can Jimmy hang on to this job? And if Trey Lance continues to do little things well, there's no way you can overlook the big thing, which is the talent disparity between the two.
Yeah, seeing the field is a big one, and Lance has had his issues with seeing the field as well. I think there was a couple of bootlegs where he's on the run and he doesn't see the crossing route, or there's a couple of times where he just gets stuck on one receiver. But Jimmy has the same problem too, and I think there is some merit to what you said when he gets rid of the ball almost too quick. And a play comes to mind where there's an out route and he just takes a quick out route. Where Lance had the same opportunity, he did not throw the check down. Instead, he waited for like a half tick more and threw the 12-yard corner route or the 15-yard stop route, whatever it may be. And there's a difference there. So it's easy to just, latch on to these completion percentages that we're seeing in practice. But we have to have context because there was a play in red zone where Jimmy had a completion, but he threw short of the sticks on third down. Like, you don't get credit for that when you force the field goal unit to come out. I think one of the biggest differences between the two, outside of physical talent, outside of the explosive plays, are Trey being able to buy time with his legs. So there was one play where he's just drifting, and he's fading away, and he throws it to a receiver coming across the field for an 8-yard gain. There's a similar scenario for Jimmy, and he like one-hopped it before the line of scrimmage. So like the difference in arm strength right there was like, whoa. And it was easy for Trey. But there was another time where I think you remember, I think it was on Wednesday, where he was sitting in the pocket for quite a while. He rolls out to his left. Instead of scrambling, he hits Ayuk, who was coming across the middle, or who had just sat down in his zone. And like those are the plays I think where Kyle's going to be really impressed. Like, oh, this guy gets it. And you mentioned his pocket presence and just going through his reads. One of the best plays of camps. And honestly, most of his touchdowns are when he gets to his second and third progressions. So we don't talk about that when we're tweeting out these completion percentages, and that's why it's going to be fun to watch. So I'm excited to see him play against somebody else. I think the fans are as well, and I can't wait for people to see just what we're talking about, because it does feel like hyperbole. It does feel like, we're going over the top with Lance, but it's hard not to when you see some of the things that he is doing. And it's not always, just because it is these bomb throws or these explosive plays that he's using with his legs, or it's just the simple stuff, the one-on-one QB stuff that we haven't had a chance to see, but know that it's going to be consistent with Lance. So I really don't have anything else to add other than that. We've been on here an hour. I think it's plenty. We ran through both sides of the ball, talked about the best, the worst, and everything we've seen through the first week. Jordan, is there anything else you want to cover?
Yeah, real quick. I had in my notes, I wanted to add the biggest thing that stands out to me. So Lance was missing in front of receivers and high, which unless there's safety help behind, really it's not ideal, but it's also not really going to, cost you. It's just going to be a missed play. Usually it's going to be an incompletion. Jimmy's missing low and behind, and we've seen far too often when that happens, the ball is in much more of a dangerous spot to be picked, turned over. And I think that's the biggest thing between them, is that while both guys are having their inconsistency problems here and there and missing, one guy's inconsistency problems are much more high risk throw, being low and behind, whereas Lance's are, again, high and away. And I think that ultimately, one other thing I wanted to say, that one of the best plays I saw during Wednesday's practice was Lance in the pocket, sidesteps pressure, and he hit Ross Dwelly up the sideline. I didn't see what coverage the defense was running. I was watching the offensive line on the play, but I was watching Lance and his ability to maneuver within the pocket. So he has the time to buy times with his legs, just like you said, but he also has a much more natural feel working within the pocket, and his footwork just looks so much crisper. So I think it just comes to a situation where this isn't, nobody's sitting here just dumping on Jimmy Garoppolo. It's just Trey Lance, even though it is the first week of August, he does so many things really well that you would have a hard time. If I didn't know he was a 21-year-old rookie, I would think that this guy was a seasoned NFL vet based on so many of these little things that he's doing really well.
Yeah, that's a really good point. And just talking about the ball placement, because two plays come to mind. One, so they were in empty, and Jimmy G had Raheem Mostert in the slot, and instead of throwing it deep outside of the numbers, he leaves it short and inside. Luckily, there was no safety there to intercept it, but like that can't happen. Another play where it was an empty again, and they had Brandon Ayuk isolated on a linebacker. So he runs like a little double move shake route, gets a step. The ball's a little bit behind him. Ayuk should probably catch the ball, but it's behind him, so he doesn't. And could you label it as a drop? Sure, why not? But it's got to be in front of him. If the pass is in front of him, Ayuk is probably running for a 60-yard touchdown because there's nobody there. So the fact that we even have to talk about is it a drop shouldn't be a thing because of the ball placement. So, yeah, that's been an issue, and hopefully it gets fixed, once the game started, just, as training camp rolls on here. But there is a lot to like when number 5 is on the field, man. And Jimmy he has to be more consistent, and he just has to make the plays that are there for him, because that's not even happening right now. So the QB competition, the QB talk is not going anywhere. And no matter who you're rooting for, you'll have a chance to see it pretty soon here. Jordan, where can we follow you on Twitter?
So you can follow me. My @'s on the screen for anybody watching. And if you're listening, it's just @splash and then _cousin. I try to put out content every day on Twitter. Film cut-ups, any observations I may have, and then you can find my work on Niners Nation as well.
Cool. Follow me at @KP_show, @Niners Nation. Again, we're going to be doing giveaways until they do this. So preseason, if Trey Sermon scores a touchdown, this George Kittle 75th anniversary jersey is yours. The next time, maybe if Trey Lance has like a 50-yard or so touchdown, this Nick Bosa jersey is yours with the 75th patch. Thanks, as always, folks. Take care.